Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to 15th episode of Rise and Fall of Ottoman Empire series on AI Deen Vision, where we explore the rich tapestry of Islamic history. Today, we journey to a pivotal era in Ottoman history, the Tanzimat reforms period from 1807 to 1876. As the dawn of the 19th century broke over Istanbul, the once mighty Ottoman Empire stood at a crossroads. For centuries, the Ottomans had been a dominant force spanning 3 continents, but now faced unprecedented challenges from European powers and internal unrest. The empire needed to adapt or face extinction. During this crucial period, 5 sultans would sit on the Ottoman throne: Mustafa IV, Mahmud II, Abdulmejid I, Abdulaziz, and Murad V. Each would play a vital role in shaping the destiny of the empire through what would become known as the Tanzimat, meaning reorganization in Ottoman Turkish. These reforms represented the Ottoman Empire's ambitious attempt to modernize its institutions, military, education, and legal systems to compete with European powers. It was a delicate balancing act, preserving Islamic and Ottoman traditions while adopting Western innovations and structures. Today we'll explore how these 5 sultans navigated this complex period, the reforms they implemented, the resistance they faced, and the lasting legacy of their efforts to save an empire in decline. Join us as we uncover the dramatic transformation of the Ottoman state during this era of reform, rebellion, and renewal. Prelude to Reform, Sultan Mustafa IV, 1807 to 1808. Our story begins with Sultan Mustafa IV, whose brief but tumultuous reign set the stage for the reform era to come. After the deposition of his cousin Selim III in 1807, Mustafa IV ascended to the throne amid political chaos. Selim III had attempted the first significant reforms through his Nizam-i-Sedid New Order program, which aimed to modernize the Ottoman military and administration. These changes threatened the traditional Janissary Corps, once elite soldiers who had become a corrupt conservative force within the empire. Mustafa IV, supported by conservative elements in the Janissaries, came to power promising to reverse Selim's reforms. He was the anti-reform sultan, representing the old guard who feared change would undermine their power and the traditional Ottoman way of life. During his short reign of just over a year, Mustafa dismantled many of Selim's initiatives and reinforced traditional power structures. However, his reign was marked by instability as reform-minded officials and military leaders began organizing against him. The climax of Mustafa's reign came in July 1808, when Alemdar Mustafa Pasha, a powerful provincial governor and supporter of reform, marched his army toward Istanbul to restore Selim III. In a desperate bid to prevent this, Mustafa ordered the execution of Selim and his own brother Mahmud. While Selim was killed, Mahmud managed to escape and hide in the palace. When Alemdar's forces took control of Istanbul, they discovered Selim's dead body. In the chaos that followed, Mustafa IV was deposed after just 14 months on the throne, and his brother Mahmud II became sultan. Mustafa himself would be executed shortly afterward on his brother's orders. Mustafa IV's brief reign represents the last gasp of the anti-reform movement's complete control over the Ottoman state. His opposition to modernization and reliance on traditional power structures proved insufficient to address the empire's deepening crises. The stage was now set for the true beginning of the reform era under his brother Mahmud II, Sultan Mahmud II, laying the foundations, 1808 to 1839. Sultan Mahmud II ascended to the throne in 1808 with the empire in crisis. European powers were encroaching on Ottoman territories, provincial governors were asserting independence, and the once feared Ottoman military had fallen far behind its European counterparts. Unlike his brother, Mahmud was determined to implement reforms, but he learned from Selim's mistakes. He understood that true reform could not occur while the Janissary Corps maintained their stranglehold on power. For nearly 2 decades, he carefully consolidated his authority and built alliances while appearing to appease traditional forces. Mahmud's early reign was marked by war and territorial losses. The Greek War of Independence, 1821 to 1829, resulted in the empire's first permanent loss of Muslim-majority territory. The disastrous Russian-Ottoman War of 1828 to 1829 ended with the humiliating Treaty of Adrianople, forcing major concessions. These defeats underscored the urgent need for military reform. In 1826, Mahmud made his decisive move. After establishing a new military unit trained in modern European tactics, he provoked the Janissaries into rebellion. When they revolted, Mahmud was prepared. In what became known as the auspicious incident, his loyal artillery units bombarded the Janissary barracks, killing thousands. The Sultan then officially abolished the Janissary Corps, removing the greatest obstacle to reform. With this historic obstacle cleared, Mahmud accelerated his modernization program. He established the Asakir-i-Mansur-i-Muhammadiyeh, victorious soldiers of Muhammad, a new Western-style army with modern uniforms, weapons, and training. European military advisors were brought in to train Ottoman officers. Mahmud's reforms extended beyond the military. He centralized the government, reducing the power of provincial notables. The Sultan established new ministries based on European models, created the first Ottoman census, and introduced a modern postal service. He reformed taxation systems and established the first official Ottoman newspaper in 1831. In education, Mahmud founded schools to train doctors, military officers, and administrators. He sent students to Europe to gain technical knowledge, laying the groundwork for a new educated class who would later drive further reforms. Perhaps most visibly, Mahmud transformed his own image. He abandoned traditional Ottoman attire for a modified European military uniform, trimmed his beard in European fashion, and had his portrait painted and distributed throughout the empire, breaking with religious prohibitions against depicting the human form. Mahmud's reforms were not merely imitations of European practices. He framed them within Islamic and Ottoman traditions, arguing that adopting new methods was essential for protecting the Muslim state. As he reportedly said, "I recognize my Muslim people only in the mosque, the Christians in church, and the Jews in the synagogue." Outside religious contexts, he envisioned all subjects as equal citizens of the Ottoman state. By the time of his death in 1839, Mahmud II had fundamentally transformed the Ottoman state structure, eliminated the main obstacles to reform, and laid the groundwork for the official Tanzimat period. His reign marks the true beginning of Ottoman modernization, earning him the nickname Peter the Great of Turkey. The empire he passed to his son Abdulmejid I was still facing immense challenges, but now had the institutional foundation necessary to address them. Sultan Abdulmejid I and the Tanzimat Declaration, 1839 to 1861. When Abdulmejid I became Sultan in 1839 at the young age of 16, the empire stood at a crucial juncture. His father had removed obstacles to reform, but the full modernization program had only just begun. Within months of taking the throne, Abdulmejid would announce the formal beginning of what historians now call the Tanzimat era. On November 3, 1839, in the Rose Garden, Gulhane, of Topkapi Palace, the Sultan's foreign minister Mustafa IV Pasha read aloud the Hatt-ı of Gulhane, noble edict of the Rose Chamber, in the presence of Ottoman officials and European diplomats. This proclamation officially launched the Tanzimat reforms and outlined principles that would guide Ottoman governance for decades. The edict promised fundamental rights to all Ottoman subjects regardless of religion, security of life, honor and property, a fair and public trial system, equitable taxation, and an end to corruption and the tax farming system. These principles marked a revolutionary shift in the relationship between the Ottoman state and its subjects. Unlike previous reforms that focused primarily on the military, the Tanzimat targeted the entire social and administrative structure of the empire. Under Abdulmejid's reign, this translated into concrete institutional changes. In the legal sphere, new penal, commercial, and maritime codes were adopted, largely based on European models but adapted to Ottoman conditions. Mixed courts were established to handle cases involving Ottoman and foreign subjects. The traditional Islamic courts remained, but were supplemented by a parallel secular legal system. Administrative reforms continued with the establishment of provincial councils that included non-Muslim representatives. Government ministries were reorganized along European lines, and a system of meritocracy was gradually introduced in place of patronage appointments. Education saw dramatic expansion, with new primary and secondary schools established throughout the empire. The first secular universities were founded, teaching modern sciences, medicine, engineering, and administration. The curriculum in religious schools was expanded to include scientific subjects. Infrastructure development accelerated with the construction of roads, bridges, and the first Ottoman railways. Telegraph lines connected distant provinces, and modern postal systems improved communication throughout the vast empire. Urban centers saw the introduction of modern amenities and European-style architecture. Perhaps most controversial were the reforms affecting the status of non-Muslims. The Hatt-ı imperial rescript of 1856, issued during the Crimean War to gain European support, reaffirmed equality of all subjects regardless of religion. Non-Muslims gained the right to serve in government positions and the military, though they could pay an exemption tax instead of military service. Churches and synagogues could be repaired or rebuilt without special permission. While these reforms aimed to strengthen the empire by fostering unity among its diverse populations, they proved controversial among conservative Muslims who saw them as abandoning Islamic principles of governance. Many non-Muslims, meanwhile, found the reforms insufficient and continued to seek European protection or push for independence. Abdulmejid's personal character helped advance the reform agenda. Unlike his forceful father, he was known for gentleness and compromise. He lived modestly despite building the lavish Dolmabahce Palace in European style, which became a symbol of Ottoman modernization. He reduced the imperial household budget and was known for personal generosity to the poor. During his reign, the empire faced significant external challenges. The Crimean War, 1853 to 1856, pitted the Ottoman Empire and its British and French allies against Russia. While ultimately victorious, the war strained Ottoman finances and increased dependence on European loans, the beginning of a debt crisis that would plague the empire until its end. When Abdulmejid died in 1861 at just 38 years old, likely from tuberculosis complicated by excessive alcohol consumption, he left an empire dramatically transformed. The reforms he implemented had begun to reshape Ottoman society, though many would take decades to fully materialize. His reign marked the period when the Ottoman Empire most actively engaged with European models while attempting to maintain its distinct Islamic and Turkish character. Sultan Abdulaziz, and the peak of Tanzimat, 1861 to 1876, Sultan Abdulaziz, younger brother of Abdulmejid I, inherited an empire in the midst of transformation. His 15-year reign would see the Tanzimat reforms reach their peak, even as the financial and political challenges of the empire grew increasingly dire. Initially, Abdulaziz continued his brother's reform agenda with enthusiasm. He became the first Ottoman Sultan to travel to Western Europe, visiting Paris, London, Vienna, and other capitals in 1867. The tour impressed upon him the need for continued modernization, but also the widening gap between Ottoman and European power. Under Abdulaziz's rule, the empire experienced unprecedented infrastructure development. The Ottoman railway network expanded significantly, with lines connecting major cities and economic centers. Modern communication systems spread throughout the provinces. Istanbul and other cities saw the construction of factories, public buildings, and cultural institutions in European architectural styles. The military remained a major focus of reform. Abdulaziz, passionately interested in naval power, built the Ottoman Navy into the world's third largest after Britain and France. New warships equipped with advanced technology were purchased or constructed. The army continued its modernization with updated weapons, training, and organizational structures. Educational reforms expanded further with the establishment of the Galatasaray Lycée in 1868, which offered education in French and Turkish and welcomed students of all religions. The School of Civil Administration, Mektebi Mulkiye, trained a new generation of bureaucrats. The first women's schools were established, and education became increasingly accessible across the empire. The legal reforms initiated under Abdulmejid I were codified during Abdulaziz's reign. The Misal, a civil code based on Islamic law but organized according to European legal structures, was compiled between 1869 and 1876. This monumental work represented an attempt to modernize Sharia law while preserving its essence. Provincial administration was reorganized with the Vilayet law of 1864, creating a more centralized system based on the French model. Provinces were divided into smaller administrative units with appointed governors and elected councils that included non-Muslim representatives. Despite these achievements, Abdulaziz's reign saw mounting challenges. The most serious was the deteriorating financial situation. The reforms were expensive, and Ottoman finances had been strained by the Crimean War. The empire began taking large loans from European banks at unfavorable terms. By the 1870s, nearly 60% of government revenue went to servicing this debt. The 1873 global financial crisis hit the Ottoman economy hard, leading to widespread hardship. In 1875, the empire partially defaulted on its debts, damaging its international standing and giving European powers greater leverage over Ottoman affairs. Politically, Abdulaziz faced growing opposition from two directions. The traditional ulama, religious scholars and conservatives objected to reforms they saw as undermining Islamic traditions. Meanwhile, a new generation of Western-educated officials, known as the Young Ottomans, criticized the authoritarian nature of the reforms and advocated for constitutional government. As financial problems mounted and opposition grew, Abdulaziz became increasingly autocratic and isolated. His lavish spending on palaces and personal projects contrasted sharply with the empire's economic troubles. By 1876, a coalition of reformist officials led by Midhat Pasha, with support from religious leaders and military officers, organized a coup. On May 30, 1876, Abdulaziz was deposed in favor of his nephew Murad V. Less than a week later, the former sultan was found dead under suspicious circumstances, officially ruled a suicide though many suspected assassination. Abdulaziz's reign represented both the pinnacle of Tanzimat reforms and the beginning of their unraveling. While he successfully continued modernizing Ottoman institutions, the financial burden of these reforms and resistance from various quarters of society created contradictions that his successors would struggle to resolve. Sultan Murad V and the Constitutional Revolution, 1876. The briefest reign of our five sultans belongs to Murad V, who ruled for only 93 days in 1876. Despite the shortness of his tenure, his accession and deposition bracketed a pivotal moment in Ottoman constitutional history. Murad came to the throne with high expectations. He was known to sympathize with the Young Ottomans, a group of intellectuals advocating for constitutional monarchy. These reformers, including influential figures like Namik Kemal and Ibrahim Sanasi, had been influenced by European liberal ideas but sought to reconcile them with Islamic traditions. They argued that representative government was compatible with Islamic principles of consultation, shura, and that a constitution would strengthen not weaken the empire. When Murad became sultan after his uncle's deposition, constitutionalists expected him to immediately proclaim a constitution. However, the stress of the coup and his uncle's subsequent death triggered a nervous breakdown. Murad, who had previously shown signs of mental instability and alcoholism, became completely incapacitated. For months, Midhat Pasha and other officials attempted to hide the sultan's condition while preparing the constitution. However, as Murad's health failed to improve and rumors spread, they reluctantly concluded that another change on the throne was necessary. On August 31, 1876, after just 3 months as Sultan, Murad V was deposed on grounds of mental illness. His brother, Abdulmejid II, became the new Sultan after promising to proclaim the constitution. Murad spent the remaining 28 years of his life under house arrest in Siragan Palace, where varying accounts suggest he eventually recovered his mental health, but remained imprisoned until his death in 1904. Though his actual reign was brief and largely ineffectual due to his illness, Murad V represents an important transitional figure. His deposition marked the end of the core Tanzimat period and the beginning of the constitutional era that would follow under Abdulhamid II. The first constitutional era would begin in December 1876, just months after Murad's removal, when Abdulhamid II reluctantly proclaimed the Ottoman constitution. Murad's tragic story illustrates the personal costs of the empire's turbulent transformation and the growing influence of constitutionalist ideas that would shape Ottoman politics in the decades to come. As we conclude our journey through the Tanzimat period, spanning from Mustafa IV to Murad V, we can appreciate the dramatic transformation of the Ottoman Empire during these pivotal decades. The reforms initiated during this era fundamentally altered Ottoman society and governance. Traditional institutions were supplemented or replaced by modern ones. Education became more secular and accessible. Legal codes standardized justice across the empire. Infrastructure projects connected distant provinces. And attempts were made to forge a new Ottoman identity that could unite the empire's diverse populations. Yet the Tanzimat reforms also created contradictions that would haunt the empire until its end. Modernization required massive borrowing, leading to financial dependency on European powers. Promises of equality to non-Muslims alienated some traditional Muslims while failing to satisfy nationalist aspirations among minority groups. The centralization of power weakened traditional bonds, while new institutions had not yet gained full legitimacy. Following Murad V's brief reign, his brother Abdulmejid II would initially continue the reform process by promulgating the first Ottoman constitution in December 1876. However, less than 2 years later he would suspend it and rule autocratically for 3 decades, while continuing selective modernization, especially in technology and infrastructure. The ultimate legacy of the Tanzimat remains complex and contested. Critics argue these reforms undermined Ottoman Islamic identity and accelerated the empire's decline by increasing European influence. Supporters contend they were necessary adaptations to changing global conditions that prolonged the empire's existence. What's clear is that the Tanzimat period represents the Ottoman Empire's most systematic attempt to address the challenges of modernity while preserving its core identity. The sultans and statesmen of this era, from Mahmud II's bold elimination of the Janissaries to Abdulaziz's infrastructure projects and Midhat Pasha's constitutional dreams, struggled with questions that continue to resonate throughout the Muslim world today. How can Islamic societies modernize without losing their essential character? What can be borrowed from other civilizations, and what must be developed indigenously? The answers they found were imperfect and ultimately insufficient to save the empire. Yet their efforts transformed Turco-Islamic governance and society in ways that would influence successor states throughout the Middle East, Balkans, and North Africa. As we reflect on this fascinating period of Islamic history, we can appreciate how these Ottoman leaders navigated the treacherous waters of tradition and change, seeking to preserve an Islamic empire in an increasingly European-dominated world. Thank you for joining us for this exploration of the Tanzimat reforms. In our next episode, we'll examine the reign of Sultan Abdulmejid II and his controversial approach to modernization without liberalization. Until then, this is AI Deen Vision, preserving our past to illuminate our future. Allah Hafiz.